Now let's try to accomplish one more set of configuration operations on these two NXOS switches. Let's try to configure a couple of IP addresses one on each of the switches, and then let's try to execute a ping operation between the two switches. So first of all, I'm going to go back to my NXOS module. So we'll just start an NXOS command. Let's look at the documentation and let's see if we can find a module that corresponds to what we're looking for. And then I'm going to make this bigger, get down to the Nexus section. We go down here and we see a bunch of NXOS, NXOS underscore BGP. Here we have a generic config, so that could be a possibility. We get down here and we see an NXOS underscore IP interface. So now let's go ahead and look at this, and in particular, let's get down to an example. So here we have an example. We have the interface, we have the transport, this is an IPv4, we have the state has to be present, i.e. the address has to be there, and then we specify the address and the mask that we want. So let's go ahead and copy our example here, go back to our machine, and let's copy NXOS VLAN into NXOS IP, and we'll go ahead and expand on what we have here. So we're going to add a new task. This new task is going to be this IP interface. Make sure we get our indentation matched correctly. So that looks like that's lined up right. Now we're going to have our arguments. So the first argument I know that I need is my provider. So here I'm going to say I'm going to use NXAPI. Now that's don't need the transport, that's embedded in the provider. Here I'm saying I want version IPv4. The state being present is actually the default, so I'm going to get rid of that. And then I'll specify the address that I want. And let's say I want it to be 10.10.10.1/24. Now I'll go ahead and add a notify for the write mem, i.e. if we make any changes, we're going to cause write mem to execute. One other thing I need to change is I need to make it be Ethernet 2.1 that needs to be configured. Now, with what I have here, it's actually going to configure 10.10.10.1/24 on both NXOS 1 and NXOS 2. So let's go ahead and run this playbook. And have that execute. While that's executing, I will go ahead, log back into this server. Now let's go back here and see if our execution has completed. Okay, so we completed the VLAN configuration section. Now we're configuring our IP, NXOS 1, NXOS 2, and now it's executing our write mem. Now let me see here if I have a netmiko show command. So let's go ahead and try to do this one here. We'll do show run int eth21 on both switches. Okay, so we can see we have the same IP address configured on both Ethernet 2.1 on NXOS 1 and NXOS 2. Now those two links are actually connected between the two switches. So now we have the issue of, well, I need this to be 10.10.10.1 for NXOS1, I need this to be 10.10.10.2 for NXOS2. Once again, since they're specific to each individual host, this should make you think about adding some variable to the inventory. So let's look at our host vars and look at adding a variable in there. Okay, so we have an IP address as this .yaml file. Let's go ahead and in here, now I had previously created this, but let's make this be the way we want it to be. Now, we actually only need an address. So we could say IP_ADDR, and we could say 10.10.10.1. Everything else should be the same between the two switches. And now I'll go ahead and do the same thing for NXOS2. Except this time I'm going to make it be 10.10.10.2. Now we'll go back in here. Now, as opposed to doing just address here, now what we're going to do is call that variable. Everything else is the same. The Ethernet's the same. It's version 4. The mask is the same. We could have obviously embedded all those as variables, and you probably would have in practice, because you're likely going to be configuring more than one interface, more than one address. Now let's just make sure that I got the variable name correct. So it is correct. And let's go ahead and add a tag so this will execute quickly. Will execute more quickly. We'll just call it IP_int. Go ahead and re-execute our playbook. Okay. Looks like we have an issue. The issue is I did not enclose this in quotes. I need to enclose that Jinja2 variable in quotes. Rerun our playbook. See if we're configuring our interface. Now notice it could detect that NXOS1 was already right, because that had the same address it had before, i.e. 10.10.10.1, but NXOS2 had to change. Notice the handler only ran on NXOS2 because NXOS1 did not change. So now we have a playbook that does both a VLAN configuration. It also does an IP interface configuration. Now I could add on to this a ping operation. There is an NXOS ping module. So if I scroll down here, I could add this in. I could accomplish the ping. I could verify that I have reachability between the two Ethernet 2.1 interfaces on that switch. But I think we've got far enough along here with some of these basic configure operations where you've seen how to configure some things. You've seen how to split variables into group vars for common variables. You've seen how to split things into host vars for things that are specific for one device versus another. We've seen how we can create a handler such that we can have the write mem conditionally execute based on whether a change happened to an earlier task or not.